The wind came in low and steady from the west, pulling dust off the bone-colored plains and sending it whispering through the dead grass. It slid between the cracks of the cabin like smoke sifting over cold floors and colder hands. Inside, the air was stale with hunger and something worse, quiet. Not the kind born of peace, but the kind that settles after long nights without answers. Miriam Stowe sat hunched on a wooden stool, her fingers trembling around a chipped mug of broth, though the fire had long since gone to embers. The children were asleep or trying to be, their bodies tucked under the moth-eaten quilt limbs too thin for winter. Mary coughed once, in her sleep, a dry, rattling thing. No strength behind it. The ground outside was frozen. A skin of frost covered the bucket by the door, and the pump had given up days ago. Miriam had cracked her knuckles bloody trying to get it to run. She'd walked 3 miles yesterday to the neighbor's, if you could call a man 5 miles off a neighbor, but came back with nothing but bruised pride and a warning about the wolves coming down early this year. They always did when the winter came fast. Her hands moved slowly, almost blindly, breaking apart the last of the stale cornbread into the broth. Her wedding ring was gone. She'd traded it for flour 2 weeks back. It hadn't been enough. James had left in the spring when the rivers were full and the roads dry. He said he'd gone to Cheyenne for work, but the letters had stopped before the first snow. That was months ago now. A part of her knew he wasn't coming back. Another part couldn't afford to believe it. Outside, a branch cracked. Not loud, but sharp. The kind of sound that didn't come from wind. Her body stiffened, her breath catching in her throat. The rifle leaned against the hearth unloaded. Bullets were gone too. Sold or lost, she couldn't remember. Then hooves. Slow, deliberate. 1 horse. A second. No wagon. She stood, the mug clattering to the floor. Her knees gave slightly, bones too cold and empty to hold her weight. She reached for the door but stopped. Light flickered under the gap. Someone held a lantern. No one came out this far unless they meant something by it. The knock was low, respectful, not the kind that forced its way in. She opened the door 3 inches and saw him. A man, broad-shouldered and dust-covered, sat atop a dun mare. His coat was worn but good quality, stitched and mended by someone who cared enough to keep it alive. His hat was tipped low, but she could see the lines around his mouth, the set of his jaw. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't threatening either. "Ma'am," he said, voice dry but not unkind. "Name's Eli Thatcher. I was told there were children here in need." Miriam's eyes narrowed. "Told by who?" "Reverend Crane out of Laramie. Said he passed by here weeks ago, tried to check in, but no one came to the door." She remembered. She'd been asleep from fever, or maybe she'd just pretended to be. "You got food?" she asked. "Real food." "I do." He gestured back toward the second horse, a pack animal with 2 saddlebags and something wrapped in canvas. She looked behind her. Mary stirred her small hand, reaching out across the bed. Her son Thomas didn't move. Miriam opened the door wider. "You can come in, but no preaching. And no looking around like you're here to judge." Eli nodded once and dismounted. "Fair enough." He moved with the quiet care of someone who'd lived around things that spook easy: animals, children, grieving women. He stepped inside the cold, following him like a shadow, and knelt by the hearth without asking. From his coat he pulled a small tin and set to work rekindling the fire. When it caught, the room seemed to breathe again, walls letting go of the chill just a little. He didn't speak much, didn't try to comfort her. Just unwrapped the bundle from the mule salt pork, a tin of beans, 2 onions, and something wrapped in cloth that turned out to be bread, still soft. When the smell of the pork hit the pan, Mary sat up wide-eyed, her ribs showing through her nightgown. Eli turned, offered her a nod. "You eat first," he said. Then we talk." Miriam didn't trust him. Not yet. But she didn't stop him either. Her hands were too raw to cook, so she let him do it. She watched every move he made, memorizing the sound of the knife against the tin plate, the way he poured water with the edge of the pot, steady in his palm. When the food was done, he served the children first, then sat near the fire and waited. He didn't ask questions, didn't offer sympathy, just watched the snow start to fall through the cracks in the window. The children ate like starved animals because they were. Quiet, fast eyes flicking toward each other, then toward the stranger by the fire, unsure if the warmth and the food would last or if it was some trick of the cold. Eli didn't speak while they ate. He stared into the flame with that steady, unreadable expression one Miriam had seen on men who'd buried too many or gone too long without hearing their own name, said kindly. His silence didn't feel heavy. It felt like space, like something waiting to be filled when she was ready. She wasn't. The children were asleep again within the hour, stomachs full, bodies curled into each other beneath the patched blanket. Miriam didn't sit. She leaned against the wall across from him, arms crossed tight, her eyes sharp. "You always ride into strangers' land with food and firewood?" she asked. Eli looked up. "Not always. But word gets out. Crane's been talking about this place for weeks. Said a woman and 2 kids were out here alone, and he'd never heard back after leaving supplies in October." She remembered that now, too. The sack left near the fence post, half torn open by coyotes before she'd dragged it inside. "Thought he was just another one of those who want to pray over our grief and ride off feeling good about it," she muttered. Eli didn't flinch. "He might be, but he also got me here, didn't he?" Miriam didn't reply. Her hands itched for something to do, so she started gathering the dishes, wiping each one down with the edge of her dress. She wasn't used to being watched, not anymore. James hadn't looked at her, really looked, since before Thomas was born. "He gone long?" Eli asked. She stiffened. "Long enough?" He nodded like that was answer enough. "I lost someone too. Few years back. Fever took my wife, child went with her. Buried them both near Medicine Bow." Her fingers slowed over the tin cup. "I didn't come to preach," he added. "Just thought maybe I'd rather ride food out to someone still breathing than sit in my own silence another day." She met his eyes. They were pale gray, clouded like a winter morning, but not cold. "Just tired." The next morning came bitter and clear, sun rising slow and mean over the plains. Miriam woke with a start, not to noise, but to the absence of it. No wind howling. No wolves. Just quiet. Then the sound of an axe. She opened the door and stepped out, blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Eli was 20 feet off, splitting wood with precise, steady rhythm. Not performing, just doing. A neat pile was already stacked near the house. "You plan on staying?" she asked, her voice rough from sleep and smoke. He didn't stop swinging. "Only if you need the help." Miriam didn't answer right away. She stood in the doorway, watching her breath curl in front of her like a ghost, unsure of where to go. After a while she said, "Don't got much to pay you with." Eli paused, resting the axe against his boot. "Didn't ask for pay. That makes me trust you less." He gave a dry smile. "That's fair." Miriam turned back inside. She wasn't sure if she wanted him gone, but she knew the children would need more wood by nightfall, and she couldn't swing an axe on an empty stomach anymore. There was still a pinch of salt left, maybe enough to stretch the pork one more day. Maybe. Later, after the work was done and the shadows grew long across the snow, they sat on the porch together, wrapped in separate silences. "You ever think about leaving?" he asked. She looked out toward the horizon where the sky bled red into the hills. "Every night," she said. "Then I wake up, and the land is still here. Still needs me." Ellie nodded. "Sometimes it's the staying that breaks a person slower." She didn't say anything to that. Didn't have to. The pain in her spine and the calluses on her palms said it loud enough. When he left that night to sleep in the barn, she let him. But for the first time in weeks, she didn't bolt the door. The fire still crackled. Subscribe and sit closer. The barn creaked in the wind, but Ellie lay still. The mare shifted in her stall, huffing warm breath into the hay. Somewhere outside a coyote called out once sharp and high, but got no answer. The quiet settled thick over the land, the kind that made a man think too much. Eli didn't mind it. He'd grown used to silence since the sickness took Sarah and the boy. It had a shape now, the silence almost a companion. He wrapped his coat tighter and stared at the rafters, the smell of dry wood and old earth settling over him. He didn't dream much anymore. When he did, it was mostly of things that hadn't happened, of what might been if the fever had passed them by. Come morning, frost lined the windows of the cabin thick as lace. Miriam was already up. He saw her through the crack in the door, crouched near the stove, feeding it little splinters of pine. She looked older in the morning light, the hollows under her cheekbones darker, but her shoulders were straight, her movements clean and purposeful. She didn't say much when he stepped in, just nodded toward a pot on the stove. "Boiled some oats," she said. "Not much sugar, but it'll warm you." He sat without asking, rubbed his hands near the fire, and waited. When she handed him the bowl, their fingers brushed. Hers were cold. His were cracked from years of riding and mending fences. Neither pulled away. "You from around here?" she asked as she fed Thomas small spoonfuls of porridge. "No. Grew up west near Rock Springs. My folks ran cattle till a bad season took half the herd. I left at 16. Worked wherever I could. Learned not to stay too long." "You're staying now." He shrugged. "Someone needed a warm meal and firewood. That's as far ahead as I've planned." Mary, now sitting upright with a quilt draped over her lap, studied him in that way children did when they weren't sure whether to fear or trust. "You got kids?" she asked, voice thin. "Had one," Eli said, not looking away. "He'd be about your age now." The girl nodded solemnly, as though she understood loss in a way no child should. After breakfast, the work started again. Miriam didn't ask him to help, he just did. He mended the door latch with a piece of wire, shoveled snow from the roof's edge, patched a tear in the chicken coop wall. There were no chickens left, but it seemed to matter to her that the place didn't fall apart entirely. They worked side by side in stretches, the quiet filled with the scrape of tools and the bite of the wind. Occasionally they'd speak. Small things. What year the well last froze. Which trees had the best branches for kindling. He noticed how her voice softened when she spoke of the land, even as it wore her down. There was pride buried under all that exhaustion. By late afternoon, Ellie was in the barn fitting new rope to the mule's harness when he heard her come up behind him. He turned, expecting a question. Instead, she held something out. A flask. Small, worn leather cover. "Found it in James's things," she said. "He never drank much. Figured it's yours now. Might help with the cold." Eli hesitated, then took it. "You don't want it." "I want heat. And peace. If that gives you either, take it." He tucked it into his coat. "Thank you." She nodded, then stepped closer. "You plan on heading out tomorrow?" "Depends," he said. "You planning to send me?" Her jaw tightened, then relaxed. "No." They stood there a long moment, the distance between them thinning like snow under sun. "You know how to fix a sled runner?" she asked finally. "I do. We've got one. Broke clean through in last year's thaw. Thought if we could fix it, maybe take the kids into town next week. Get supplies. Let them see something other than white fields and me falling apart." Eli smiled, just barely. "Then we'll fix it." For the first time, she smiled back. Not wide, not full, but real. It looked like something that had been buried and dug up again, half ruined but still worth holding on to. That night, as the fire crackled low and the wind howled soft against the window panes, Miriam didn't bolt the door, and Ellie didn't sleep in the barn. The floor creaked beneath his boots as Ellie stepped inside. He set his coat on the peg by the door without a word. Miriam was near the hearth again, shoulders hunched, a book open on her lap, though she wasn't reading. Her eyes followed the flames instead, her face drawn in profile, all sharp angles and quiet strength. She didn't look up. "There's a draft coming through the east wall," he said. "I'll patch it in the morning." She nodded once, her voice low. "I've been stuffing rags in the cracks. Doesn't hold. I'll use shims and seal it with pitch," he said. "Won't be pretty, but it'll keep the cold out." The silence stretched. Not tense, not awkward, just full. A kind of silence that held the weight of everything that hadn't been said. The children were asleep already. Mary curled on her side, a strand of hair across her cheek. Thomas wheezed gently with each breath. The firelight danced over their faces, casting shadows that looked too old for such small bodies. "I should left last summer," Miriam said suddenly. "Packed up and taken the kids somewhere green, somewhere with softer ground. But I kept waiting. Thought he'd come back." Ellie didn't press. Just let her speak. "He sent one letter," she said. "Said he found work in a rail yard. Promised to send for us when he had enough. That was in May." She swallowed, voice tightening. "By August I knew. I knew he was gone. Not dead, just gone." Eli watched the fire. "Some men can't bear the weight. Doesn't mean you were wrong to hope." She gave a bitter little laugh. "Hope's what rotted me, not the cold." He looked over at her, then really looked. Her eyes were glassy, rimmed with red but dry. There was something almost defiant in her stillness. "You held the line," he said. "That's no small thing." She turned toward him, studying his face in the flickering light. "Why are you really here, Ellie?" He didn't answer right away. He stood, moved to the small table, and picked up the bread knife, turning it over in his hand. "Because I didn't want to go another winter wondering if someone out there needed saving, and I just rode on past." Her brow furrowed. "You think you're saving us?" He shook his head. "No. I think maybe you saved yourselves. I just showed up before the frost took the rest." A long pause. "Do you believe in second chances?" she asked. Ely leaned against the table, arms crossed. "I believe in work, in staying put when it gets hard, in keeping your word even if no one hears it but the wind. If that's what a second chance looks like, then yeah, I believe in it." Miriam closed the book and set it aside. "I forgot what it was like, having someone to talk to without bracing for the sting." He moved toward her, slow and deliberate. Sat across from her on the hearthrug, legs folded, his boots leaving damp marks on the floor. "I don't know what comes next," he said, "but I'd stay. A while anyway. If you'd have me." She didn't smile, didn't nod. She just reached out her hand, bare now, no ring, and placed it on his. The fire popped. The wind shifted outside. And for the first time in a long time, the cabin didn't feel like a place for surviving. It felt like a place for staying. The next week unfolded slowly, like thawing ground. Mornings were still hard. The cold bit as fierce as ever, and Thomas's cough hadn't eased. But there was a rhythm now. A kind of quiet partnership that grew not from words but from action. Ely rose before the sun most days. Miriam would find the fire already lit, a pot of water warming, and sometimes, when luck held, a rabbit dressed and ready to stew. He fixed the east wall, mended the root cellar door, and started drawing plans for a smokehouse. She didn't ask for it. He just saw what was broken and laid his hands to it. She found herself watching him more than she meant to. The way he moved, calm and steady. The way he spoke to the children, especially Thomas, never in that high false voice some men used around boys. He spoke to him like he was already a man, like he could be counted on. One afternoon, after hours spent sanding down the warped sled runner, Eli pulled a length of rawhide taut and tied it off. "That'll hold," he said. "We can get to town in 2 days if the weather stays." Miriam stood behind him, wiping flour off her hands. "And if it doesn't, then we wait." He looked up. "But I'd like the boy to see a doctor. That cough's too deep." Her breath caught. No one had said it aloud. Not since October. "I've been scared to move him," she said. Scared the cold would finish what the hunger started. Eli stood brushing snow off his knees. "The cold's not easing up, but we'll bundle him tight. I'll ride a head-break trail. You stay close behind." Miriam nodded. She didn't trust the weather or the road or luck, but she was beginning to trust him. They left at dawn 2 days later. The sled creaked under their weight, but it held. Thomas was wrapped in every scrap of wool they had. Mary clung to Miriam's side, her little boots tucked in beneath the quilts. Eli rode ahead, lantern swinging from his saddle horn, casting pale yellow light on the snow. The road was rough, more drift than path, but they made camp before dark, huddled near a bluff that shielded them from the worst of the wind. Eli built the fire while Miriam held Thomas close, singing low, tuneless songs into his ear, more hum than melody. That night, after the children had fallen asleep, Ellie sat beside her. They didn't speak for a long while, just stared into the fire and let the warmth settle in their bones. "You ever think about staying?" she asked, her voice barely more than breath. Eli didn't answer right away. He reached into his coat, pulled out a small wooden carving. A horse, simple but carefully made. He handed it to her. "I carved that for my boy. Never got the chance to give it to him." He looked out across the dark snow. "If I stayed, it wouldn't be to run from that. It'd be to carry it somewhere worth carrying." Miriam turned the carving over in her hand. "You'd be welcome, if that's what you're saying." He looked at her, and for the first time there was something new in his eyes, hope, fragile and unspoken, but steady. "That's what I'm saying." They reached Laramie by the second evening. The doctor was kind if tired. He listened to Thomas's lungs, gave them medicine, and told Miriam he'd likely pull through so long as he stayed warm and fed. She wept then. Not loudly. Just a single sharp sound from the back of her throat, and then her shoulders crumpled. Ellie didn't say anything. He just placed a hand on her back and kept it there. They stayed in town for 4 nights. The local widow offered them her spare room. Eli helped fix her porch in return. Mary played with the baker's girl, and Thomas smiled for the first time in months. It was crooked and small, but it was his. On the 5th morning they hitched the mule and turned back toward home. But the cabin wasn't just a place anymore. Not a shell, not a graveyard of dreams. It was something else now. It was theirs. The wind met them like a greeting when they crested the final rise and saw the cabin again, weather-beaten and small against the frozen land, but standing. Smoke rose thin from the chimney. A good sign. The fire they'd banked before leaving had taken. Miriam pulled the sled to a stop, her arms aching, Thomas bundled and sleeping against her chest. Eli turned in the saddle, gave a quiet nod toward the house. "You sure about this?" he asked. She looked past him, snow crunching under her boots as she stepped ahead. "I'm sure." The children were too tired to help unpack, but they didn't need to. Miriam moved with purpose now, lifting, untying, stacking wood in the lean-to like she wasn't half-starved and barely healed from the winter. Eli worked beside her in silence, matching her pace, giving space when she needed it, stepping in when she faltered. Inside, the heat welcomed them, slow but honest. The new medicine helped Thomas sleep deeper that night. Miriam watched over him for hours before lying down. Eli was already rolled up in his bedroll near the door. "You don't have to sleep on the floor," she said. He turned his head. "Not right for me to assume anything." She walked toward him, her nightdress hanging loose, frayed at the hem. She knelt beside him and sat there, her hand resting near his. "I don't want promises." "Not yet," she whispered. "But I want you to stay." "I already chose to," he said. Their hands touched just barely. That was all. Spring arrived in pieces. The snow didn't melt so much as disappeared day by day, like it was ashamed of itself. The trees budded late, cautious. The chickens returned courtesy of a neighbor 2 ridges east who heard about Miriam's boy and sent 3 hens and a crate of seed. Word had gotten out. The widow Stowe wasn't quite a widow anymore. Together they planted a garden. Peas, beans, onions. Eli built a new fence, stronger this time, and taught Thomas how to help. Mary took to sewing, stitching little pieces of old dresses into one quilt they all slept under when the wind howled too loud. One evening, with the last of the light still clinging to the sky, Miriam stood at the fence line, arms folded, watching Eli break ground for the new shed. "You ever think about what we're building here?" she asked. He wiped his brow, leaned on the spade. "Every day." And he looked over at her, and in that moment she saw it again, that same quiet hope. The kind that doesn't shout. The kind that stays through the worst storms. "I think we've got a chance," he said. "Not a guarantee, but a chance." She walked over, took the spade from his hands, and planted it in the dirt. "I'll take it," she said. That night, after the children were asleep, they sat together on the porch. Stars spread wide overhead. Somewhere nearby a coyote yipped and fell silent. Miriam leaned into him, her head resting against his shoulder. He didn't speak, just wrapped his arm around her and held her close. No promises, no vows, just presence. And that was enough for now. By midsummer the earth had softened so much that bare feet could press into it without flinching. Rows of beans ran green and tidy behind the house, and the chickens strutted like they'd always belonged there. The air carried the smell of soil and smoke and a sweetness Miriam hadn't known in years, maybe ever. She woke earlier now, not out of fear but rhythm. The kind that comes when life is still hard but no longer cruel. She would stand at the window before the children stirred and watch Ellie in the field, always moving, always working, as if he owed the land something and meant to repay it in full. One morning after a rainstorm, she stepped outside and found him near the shed, shirt damp with sweat hammer in hand. He turned at the sound of her boots in the mud. "You fix everything you touch?" she asked, smiling. "Only the things that let me." She held out a cloth. Inside, half a loaf of fresh cornbread. "Call it a bribe." He took it with a nod of thanks, broke it in half, and handed the bigger piece back. "You ever miss it?" she asked after a while. "Your life before." Eli sat on the edge of the porch, elbows on his knees. "I miss who I was when I had them. But I don't miss the silence that came after." Miriam sat beside him. Her fingers brushed the back of his hand, slow and deliberate. "You think it's wrong us finding something again?" He didn't answer right away. Just reached into his coat and pulled out a piece of folded cloth. Opened it. Inside, nestled in the center, was a ring, simple, gold-worn, smooth by time. "I had this made the year we buried Sarah. Figured I'd never wear it again. But I didn't pawn it either." Miriam stared at it. Her throat felt tight, but not from grief. "I don't want to replace her," she said. "You wouldn't. You'd be choosing me and I'd be choosing you. That's all." She didn't reach for the ring. Not yet. But she didn't look away from it either. Weeks passed. The shed was finished, the fence held, and Thomas began to run without coughing. Mary laughed more easily. She took to calling Eli uncle until one morning at breakfast she slipped and called him Pa. No one corrected her. The sky turned orange with harvest light. Neighbors stopped by more often, offering seed tools hands. One brought a Bible. Another brought news of a traveling judge passing through in September. "You thinking of making it official?" the man asked with a wink. Eli glanced toward Miriam, who stood behind the screen door, arms crossed, watching the exchange with careful eyes. "Maybe," Eli said. That night she stood in the doorway while he stripped bark from a fence post. "You know the judge'll ask," she said. "I know." She walked over, wiped her hands on her apron, and reached into her pocket. When she pulled her hand out, it held the ring. "I'd like the children to see something that holds," she said. "Something they can believe in." Eli took the ring from her, his hand closing gently around hers. "Then we'll build it together." They married beneath the cottonwoods, the wind tugging soft at her dress. The children stood beside them, barefoot and grinning. No music, no guests beyond those who mattered. Just the land, the sky, and two people who had already survived enough to know what love wasn't and chose it anyway. That night, as stars gathered and the world exhaled, they sat side by side on the porch once more. In her lap a swaddled bundle stirred small, warm, and new. "I didn't think there was anything left in me," she whispered. Eli kissed her temple. "You were wrong." The prairie stretched before them, harsh, wild, unforgiving. But in that moment it looked like home. Subscribe and let the West keep teaching.